you.
I had to go unmute myself when I joined.
Oh,
Randy's here.
all right, Randy. Hi, Randy. Thank you.
I'm going to be eating my dinner while this is going on.
Please mute. I wonder if that's a setting Steven has. So my iPad is logged in as Steven, and my computer is logged in as me. Hi there. I don't know who BR is. Or an 816 number.
Is the public going to be on here too, or are they going to call in?
No, they should be listening live, just normal streaming like we usually do.
Okay. That's probably Brian Roth.
Oh, yeah, probably. Hi, Kathy. Oh, you're muted. And Leo. Hey, Leo. You're automatically muted, so if you're trying to talk, you need to unmute yourself.
Hello, Miss Caitlin.
I miss you, Kathy. Hey, John.
I know. We need to see each other soon.
Here I am. You'll hear me talk for a little bit today.
I know. I love the pictures you send of your daughter trying to wear her out.
Oh, man. It's been an experience, if that's a good term.
I can only imagine.
Caitlin, this is Leo. Didn't you say all of our microphones were muted?
They will be. They should be, unless you unmuted it.
That's funny that Kathy's the only one talking.
I think she unmuted it.
I did.
Shocking. You keep up.
I wasn't talking to you.
So Les should be on, and a phone number I don't recognize, a 620 number. If you're just joining us, your microphones are muted, so if you want to speak, you need to unmute them yourself. Or I can also unmute you.
Randy, is that good?
I can hear you, Les.
I know, hi.
Yes, it's
Hi
very
there.
good.
Very good.
Who else are we waiting on? I don't know your group as well.
Is Mr. Beanhoff with us?
There are 2 cell phone numbers that I don't recognize, so possibly. I haven't heard him though.
And Steve,
Caitlin, do they know if they hit those 3 little dots and then click on it and go down to rename, they can put their names in there so people know who they are when they talk?
They do now. Thank you, Reagan.
Mm-hmm. So if you hit the 3 dots and then it says rename, you can put your name in there.
Here we go.
Just said Beanhoff left the meeting.
I think he's here. Hi there. Oh, that's audio. Oh, you might be muted. Let me unmute you.
Find the link,
You're good to go.
no dash.
Mhm. Hi, Bruce.
Hi.
I'm Caitlin. I don't know if we've ever officially met.
Well, nice to meet you, Caitlin. Thank you for assisting
Nice.
tonight.
I'm doing what I can.
Are we all on and ready to start?
I don't know your group as well as I do, or as well as you do.
5, 6, 7, 8.
We got at least 8, it looks like.
9, yeah.
I don't know, I don't recognize the 2 other numbers on there.
There are 2 cell phones, but I don't know who they are.
16, I don't know.
The one number down in the lower left is is planning staff here in the council chambers. Our audio's coming through that while the video feed's coming through the other one.
So I think I can rename you. I wonder if I can do that. Rename.
Looks like we have 6, including me, commissioners. Brian Rock, 7.
8.
I think there's 8.
8, yep. So Doug and Mark, whenever you guys are ready.
Hello, Mr. Ross.
Hello. Mark, are we ready to start?
Yeah, I think so. We should be good to go. Recorders are on, and I think we've got everybody connected.
Okay, well, welcome to the April 20th, 2020 meeting of the Shawnee Planning Commission. We'll start with roll call. Commissioner Montgomery? Here. Commissioner Roth?
Here.
Commissioner Peterson?
Here.
Commissioner Willoughby? Commissioner Willoughby is absent or on mute. Commissioner Beanhoff is here. Commissioner Busby is absent. Commissioner Wise? Not hearing Commissioner Wise. I know he was tentative. Commissioner Braley? Here. Commissioner Smith? Here. Commissioner Nunick? Here. And Commissioner Bingham? Here. All right. Well, welcome, and please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands, uninformed, underground, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, tonight on the consent agenda items 1 through 7 are listed under the consent agenda items unless there's a request to remove the items or one of the items from the consent agenda. The items will be approved in one motion. Is there a request to remove any items from the consent agenda?
I motion to approve the consent agenda as presented on the agenda meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Nunick. Hearing no request to remove any items, do we have a second?
This is Commissioner Braley. I'd like to make a second that we approve the consent agenda and meeting minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Braley. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Any other discussion on the items? Okay. Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next item is new business. And any new business for the Planning Commission? We have none on the agenda.
I think that the only other item on the agenda is the Green Streets presentation for in the other business section, and so with that, Mr. Chairman, I would turn it over to Caitlin and Reagan Long. Just introduce them. Caitlin is in our city manager's office. She's the assistant city manager, and Reagan Long is in our community development team. She's our senior private development review engineer, and they have a good presentation to show you on our new Green Streets concept, and so I'll turn it over to them.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. Those pictures will flash up for a second, please.
Oh, good. They've definitely been a handful. Being at home, being the assistant city manager to a relatively large city and having a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old have maybe tested me to the limits that I haven't in the past. So thank you, and I'm really glad to be here. I don't know all of you, but I do know some of you, so your faces make me happy. All of your faces, even though I don't know some of you. I'm a very much a people person, so being isolated has been challenging for me. So I'm really glad to give this presentation to you tonight. As Doug mentioned, Senior Development Reagan Long from our Community Development Department and I are going to present a concept to you that was presented at the Council Committee meeting earlier this month. At that meeting, it really had unconditional support. So we're really hoping that this group will bless this concept and idea as well. So with that being said, can you all see my screen first off?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. So with that being said, as you may or may not know, we're hoping to do a full comprehensive plan update later this year, but we have a truly amazing staff. So before that even gets going, we continually evaluate and look for any updates that can occur to that comprehensive plan, and we do those in-house if possible. So that update really started off and kicked off last year when Lauren in our Community Development Department started with an update to the comp plan, specifically with the downtown town square. Ooh, that's a mouthful. District addition to the comp plan. And this year, we're hoping that we can incorporate this Green Streets concept that you'll hear about tonight. As you can see on the slide, we created an internal committee. It was formed with representation from a number of different groups, including the city manager's office with myself, and then a number of community development and engineers, and also in our public works department as well. And we're hoping to look for and identify opportunities within the comp plan to promote the more rural areas of our city and promote development within those areas. A key component of any development is to evaluate that area before you select the site and what kind of infrastructure or what kind of improvements need to be made before that site is developed. That's probably the number one. Reagan will speak to it a little bit more, but probably the number one identifier of where we're going to develop or where a developer is going to come and put their development, whether that be commercial or residential. So tonight we're going to cover kind of what this concept is. We're calling it a green streets concept. Well, that means a number of different things kind of across aspects of our community, across our organization. You'll hear a lot about what that means tonight, and hopefully what these improvements can give to our city and how we can improve those requirements in our comprehensive plan to promote development in those more rural areas of the city, but also to update those tools that we have in our comprehensive plan that may or may not have been looked at or updated in a number of years. And then we'll also give you real-life examples of what kind of developments this will affect and how it will hopefully promote those developments in areas that may not have experienced them before. And then additionally, we'll dive into what staff recommendations are for moving forward with this concept, how it's going to impact those developers, and how we can update those aspects of the comprehensive plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reagan.
Hi. Like Caitlin said, I'm a senior development engineer in community development. So you probably see my name on staff reports a lot that get sent your way. So our first objective was to kind of look at what Shawnee does for our street improvements and how we compare to the other core cities in Johnson County like Olathe, Overland Park, and Lenexa. And so what Shawnee does for our street improvements is when there's a new development, the developer has to improve half the street to a full improvement standard, which means half of the street has to have curb and gutter, an enclosed storm system, sidewalks, streetlights, and then a minimum pavement width of 22 feet. And when we looked at that compared to what other cities do, we actually require more. In Overland Park and Olathe, to do development there, typically there's just a minimum pavement width requirement of 24 feet, and they don't do curb and gutter and storm systems. So the developer doesn't have to do as many street improvements. So it's a lower cost to develop. Lenexa does a lot of benefit districts, which is something that's not real feasible in Shawnee, just based on the scope of kind of projects we get in and the developments as they come into us. So our areas of concern are we require more than our core cities. Developers have to obtain the right-of-way, which is hard, because when you're developing a site, you either have to dedicate all the right-of-way from your own property, which could be 60 feet up to 120 feet, depending on the street classification, or you got to try to negotiate with your neighbor for right-of-way to split the section line. And again, the city doesn't negotiate or condemn right-of-way on private development, so it can be really tricky for a developer to try to negotiate right-of-way from a neighbor that maybe doesn't want to develop at that time. We find it to be cost prohibitive when we have large street improvements that they're required to do. And then we put in these large street improvements, but it becomes a long-term maintenance item. And the picture in the bottom right, if you're familiar with Preserve It Clear Creek, it's a development out around 79th and Clare Road. We extended Clare north to a dead-end point, and now the road sits with no access off of it. And it's been that way for a couple of years, and it could sit there for 5 to 10 years with limited traffic, and the road is built to the same standard as Woodland or Monticello. But right now it has zero traffic on it because there's nowhere for anyone to travel on it. And so we're finding is we're building streets that exceed our current need based on traffic counts. So our second objective is we kind of looked at our development tools. So when a developer comes into Shawnee and meets with our staff, we have what we kind of tools that we open up every time we meet with them to look at how feasible a project is. And a lot of them you'll be more familiar. We gave this to the governing body, so some of this will be pretty standard for you guys, but you can flip to the next one, Caitlin. So our zoning map is what we like to call as a snapshot of 2020. This is how Shawnee looks currently, right now in 2020. And as you can see, obviously we have a lot more yellow and a lot more development in East Shawnee, and Western Shawnee there's a lot more green, which means ag space and developable area. So just as basically a glance of what Shawnee looks like currently with every type of land use out there. And then we have our land use guide, which that's the complete build out of Shawnee. And that could be 2060, it could be 2070, we don't know. But that shows where the city's more balanced. We still have large green areas for Shawnee Mission Park. We still have rural residential and still some ag space, but the city's more balanced. And then what we have is our circulation plan. And this is what we use. When someone comes in, this is how we do different street classifications. And what we found is if you look, Clare Road, which is in Western Shawnee, that has, and we'll talk traffic counts at the end. We have a slide that shows you the exact traffic counts. But Clare Road right now has the same street classification as, for instance, Monticello, Woodland, Renner, Lackman, Quivira, Plum. And so when a developer comes in, if they want to develop adjacent to Claire, they're going to build the same type of road as Woodland, even though the traffic counts don't justify it currently. The traffic counts are around, I think, about 1,000 a day. And so we're building infrastructure that exceeds the need based on the land use in that area and the population out there, the density out there, and even the future land uses, because we don't have any commercial areas identified on Claire. It's all low-density residential. And so it got us thinking, we're building roads based on the 2070 build out, not our 2020 snapshot of what Shawnee looks like. Other things to consider when someone wants to develop in Shawnee is the geographic points of interest. We have a good street network with close proximity to 435 and Interstate 70 and K7. The bodies of water we have, where it's our creeks and stuff are an advantage to Shawnee, but yet that provides floodplains, which means bridges and expensive infrastructure to span across floodplains. We have county boundary on our north side. We have 2 school districts, which is a little unique. And one of those districts takes a lot of our our school age population west. And then we have the landfill and Shawnee Mission Park. And while Shawnee Mission Park is a great asset to the city, it also gives us a huge green space, a huge buffer where there is no development. And then our topography. But the biggest one for us is the Kansas River. Based on the Kansas River, that's as far west as Shawnee's ever going to develop. We won't annex any further west because it's not cost effective to ever look at spanning or putting another bridge across the river. So Mize and Clare, as far west as we're going to develop in Shawnee, so putting some of the same street classifications for Clare and Mize doesn't make sense when the density is never going to be that, equivalent to Flum or Quivira or Woodland even. So once we kind of looked at our tools that we use when developers come in and talk to us, we looked at where do we need to have maybe improve upon to make something a piece of land more developable. What gap do we maybe have in our current tools that would make a piece of land more cost efficient for a developer? And so we took a current example project. And if you click one more time, Caitlin, this is Village of Clear Creek. It developed a preliminary plat came in for it in the early 2000s, and then when 07, 08, the housing market recession hit, it's kind of sat out there. So it has a preliminary plat on it, and I've been with the city for about 12 years. And this is one of the projects that every year someone comes in, has an interest in developing it, because it's a great piece of residential property. It'll be a great single-family home. But when you look at why it doesn't develop, people come and meet with us, and then they always walk away. And hopefully through this, you'll kind of see why it's not a very cost-effective piece of property to develop. So if you start looking at the tools we talked about and applying them, this is our zoning map, and currently it's zoned for low-density residential and ag, so the zoning fits. If you look at the land use guide, it's already zoned for residential, and then there's a small pocket of commercial, which again, this is about the only piece of commercial that's west of Gleason. And then you look at the floodplain on it, and based on the floodplain, already about a third of the property is lost because of the floodplain. So to develop this property, already 1/3 of it is taken away. And then you start adding in our streams, which means there's stream corridors, or they have to pipe the streams across the property. So again, piping stormwater can be very expensive, or providing a corridor also eats up more space, and it's about a 60-foot to 120-foot buffer. And then this slide shows our circulation plan. And there's Clare, which is a major collector. So that would have to be improved to a similar standard of Monticello or Woodland. And then 67th Street up top in the red, that road, we would not require them to put it in, but they'd have to dedicate the right-of-way. So again, that's more land that they'd have to dedicate for the right-of-way for Clare and 67th on top of the floodplain. And for a project with this small, by the time you take out the floodplain and the right-of-way, for a project of this scope to basically absorb all the costs to make the improvements to Clare, it's not very financially viable for a developer. And then you throw in the last piece, and that's topography. And while Shawnee has gorgeous topography and gorgeous views, and this subdivision will have amazing cul-de-sacs and walkout lots that face, the creek with wooded lots, it's very expensive because they're going to hit rock. They're going to have a lot of dirt work to do. So instead of having a nice flat piece of land with already improved streets in other parts of Johnson County, they're going to have gorgeous lots, but they're going to have to do a lot of work and have a lot of costs to get there. And all those costs add into your lot costs. And when you start adding all those in, the lot costs get so high that in order for a developer to build on here, the lot costs are so high, is it even viable for someone to build a house there and be able to afford to build a house there? So through looking at all the tools we have, we kind of identified the need for an interim street plan. Because that piece, Village of Clear Creek, somehow we got to take Clare Road, which is in the top picture up there. That's an actual shot of Clear Road adjacent to Village of Clear Creek. And we affectionately call it the goat path because it's not even wide enough for two-lane traffic in parts. But we got to find a bridge, some way to get that gap between Clear Road as a goat path, as we sometimes call it, to a balance between that and Woodland, which is a 3-lane section of road with bike lanes, sidewalks, and enclosed storm system. Somehow we got to figure out an interim plan that fits the need. It blends in with the community. It provides, a conduit to get these residential enclaves from West Shawnee to places of work and school and business and entertainment, and also provide a safe means of travel. So when you look at it, we started looking at other cities, and there's two ways of thinking. One is, if they build it, development will come, and that's the Purcell and Nexus taking a lot. That's Prairie Star Parkway and 95th Street. The street improvements out there are probably over 10 years old, and you can see even with those street improvements, they still have not really got a lot of development out there. And those are put in through benefit districts, and in Shawnee, it's really hard to get benefit districts because it takes a large CIP budget, which we don't have, and it takes a lot of work because you have to acquire a lot of right-of-way or have developers willing to basically all work together to give this, to allow the city to purchase the right-of-way, or the city has to condemn it. The model Overland Park uses the other project on the other photo on the right side. That's around 159th and Schweitzer and Quivira. And you'll see they do more the method where they allow development to come. They make sure the streets are safe and are widened to a minimum pavement width, but then they allow development to come. And when the traffic generates the need for street improvements, then they improve those streets. That way it also cuts down on maintenance. So they're not building streets that exceed the use or need that they currently have. This is a quick shot of Bristol Valley. It was one where we did partial improvements. There was a horrible sight distance going into the subdivision. Instead of leaving it, we basically came in, had the developer cut down the hill, widen it out, add some striping on there, and improve the sight distance. And overall, it really added to the aesthetics of that subdivision's entrance. So Shawnee, we started thinking, okay, we don't want to call them rural streets because that's not the end goal either. But when you start looking at green streets and what it means, there's different terms and different ideas. In urban areas, you're going to see rain gardens, bioretention cells, and it's going to have a very defined look like the top two photos. But green streets also have a look like the bottom photo in a more rural setting, or more suburban setting. And based on what ASCE and Federal Highway Administration define a green street, it's using context-sensitive engineering, sustainable materials, and sustainable maintenance. And it's adapting for livability for its residents. And it's street diets and having streets that have as least impacts on its surroundings. And so when we started talking, it made sense that we start looking at street diets. Instead of building a 3-lane road when our traffic counts are 1,000 cars a day, maybe it makes sense to build more of a 2-lane road with ditch sections that provide water quality benefits in addition to lower maintenance costs because there's less pavement to maintain or less curb and gutter to replace. So as a staff, I'm a real big believer, you got to drive it to understand it. So as a staff, we did a tour several months ago, and it was staff from community development, the city manager's office, and also from our public works department. And we set out and did several projects that kind of related to how Western Shawnee will develop as we grow and expand to the west. And the first site we drove was 159th Street in Schweitzer. And that red circle kind of shows you then the blow-ups of those areas. And then, yeah. So one thing we hear is ditch section roads can kind of have a negative connotation, which makes sense in some context. But when you look at it here, you have very affluent neighborhoods with very nice homes, and the interior residential streets stay with curb and gutter and sidewalks in your traditional enclosed storm system, which is how we would do it still in Shawnee. Residential enclaves would stay with our typical residential street sections. But it'd be more your conduit streets, your thoroughfares to get people to where they need to go, would stay as a ditch section road. And it provides a greater safety because it's widening the roads, but it's also not overbuilding the roads and exceeding our current need based on traffic counts. As you can tell here, they acquire the right-of-way they need now, and they grade everything, so it has a very nice aesthetic, pleasing feel to it. The next area we went and toured was 179th and Quivira. This is Blue Valley Southwest High School. It's the brand new 6A high school that was built down south in Overland Park. There's also Aubrey Bend Middle School out there. We looked at this one because some people say, well, how can ditch sections function under a high intensity use? And so high schools, as you know, generate a large traffic count in the morning and when school lets out, and also during ball games. And how they handle it is they can still maintain and handle the increased traffic loads, but with adding turn lanes as needed. One thing we found unique here is they don't actually provide sidewalks or streetlights, which next to a school you would think that'd be provided. So that was one of the things the staff we talked about is, having the need for still having walkability for the residents. The next place we toured was 167th and Lone Elm in Olathe. If you've been down there, this is a big industrial park for them. And then if your kids play soccer like mine, there's a huge soccer complex to the south as well. So this has a lot of industrial traffic during the week, but on the weekends it has thousands of cars in and out, every single hour for the soccer games and soccer tournaments that they hold there. And one thing as staff we looked at is the gravel shoulders. We didn't like the look of them, the feel of them. We thought it would be a long-term maintenance issue. So that was one thing, just driving it, we didn't like the feel of the street for the gravel shoulder aspect. And then the final street section we went and drove was 159th and Lackman. This is in Olathe, kind of Olathe, Overland Park border through there. There's Heritage Park. And if you take note of the picture on the left, you'll see how many cars are on there. These are rural streets in a sense, but yet they have a very high traffic count, and they handle them with a very high level of service. You can also see all the development in the area around there. One thing we noticed about both these street sections is the 4-foot asphalt shoulders. As staff, we felt that gave it a better sense of comfort when driving them, which that's something you want when you drive a street. You want to have a comfort level when you drive it as well. So staff, this is what our proposed green street section would look at for the most part. It would have your 4-foot asphalt shoulders, the pavement markings, the manicured ditches, and then the trail on one side of the road. And we'll dive in a little deeper. So some of our selection points is it has to work in areas of low density residential and future development. So this is kind of a shot looking back south, and you can see where there's a low density residential, but there's a lot of density out there, a lot of development, but there's a lot of future development too. And Heritage Park on the weekends, because of softball and football and everything, it generates a lot of traffic. So these are examples of where they're using a green street concept and it's working and providing, circulation as needed, but also not over building a street based on traffic counts that just don't justify large 3- and 4-lane sections of road right now. The other things we like is the comfort level when you drive these, the 4-foot shoulders, which is nice because it also does for our biking community as a bike lane. The pavement markings help at nighttime with the reflectiveness on the pavement, having manicured edges and maintained ditches. And this would be done as a property come in and they would plat, through the plat, the right-of-way would be required to be maintained by the HOA. So all ditches would have to be maintained, as in any subdivision, by the adjacent HOA as part of their right-of-way and as part of their covenants and their plat requirements. And then in Shawnee, we feel it's very important to provide streetlights just for another aspect of safety, and then also the multi-use paths. So instead of providing 2 5-foot sidewalks on each side, as staff, we felt that one large, 10-foot multi-use path would be more beneficial to the community. And then the advantage, too, is then the trail will then tie into the residential areas and provide connectivity from the residential areas to the main street, but also from different residential areas on each side of the road. There'd be walkability, connectivity, and there's also schools out there off some of the streets like mine, so it provides that walkability to get to school, too. Curb transitions, that's another question, is how do you go from a curb street to this section? This just is a quick photo that shows how it's a smooth transition to allow the stormwater system to go from an open system to an enclosed system or vice versa. Another thing we would make sure to point out is we would get the right-of-way we need now. So we would still get the 80 to 120 feet of right-of-way. We would locate the utilities outside of where any future pavement could possibly be widened. We would grade and adjust any site distance now to make sure that it met our current street design standards. We'd adjust any type of site distance issues by cutting down curves or adding fill in the bottom of curves as needed. And then again, we would place utilities outside. So we wouldn't have to acquire right-of-way in the future, and then it would be set up for a future widening if it was justified at a later date based on traffic counts. So our second committee action was kind of considerations for development. The biggest thing is to provide connectivity. If you've ever driven West Shawnee, there's a lot of gaps. 75th Street, 71st Street, a lot of these streets don't exist out west. Clare Road has gaps in it. And these are major section line roads that need to go through, but to get them through, the city doesn't have the ability to in our CIP at this time, and developers just aren't finding it cost effective to make our major street improvements, full improvements with curb and gutter and sidewalk, and an enclosed storm system to still be able to develop their property and make the lots at a cost that people can buy them and afford to build a house. We also want to make sure that there's water quality benefits, which open ditches provide that in a stormwater treatment sense. We want to make sure we construct roads for realistic traffic volumes, and we'll have a slide coming up in a second that shows what the volumes are out there and how building a 3-lane road just is not justified at this time. We want to look at adjacent land uses. Again, in Western Shawnee, based on our current comp plan and on the comp plan that we're going to be developing in 2021, there's no plan to put future commercial out there. It'll still stay mainly a residential area just because of the river and the ability to not be able to develop any further to the west. And we want to make sure that our circulation plan reflects not a one-size-fits-all, but a customized approach to our roads, that the road meets the needs for the adjacent land uses and adjacent residents, and it's not just building Mize and Claire to the same standards as Quivira just because they have the same classification. And looking at it deeper, we still want to build gold roads, but not platinum roads. We want roads that our residents can use, provide safe means of transportation, but we're not overbuilding roads and causing long-term maintenance issues for the city. Here's a current traffic count. Kevin Manning, our transportation manager, put this together, and it does a great job of showing where our traffic counts are. You'll see basically Quivira, Neiman, Johnson, a lot of those are between 14,000 to 17,000 cars per day. And those are built as major collector streets. And then if you look at our proposed green streets, 75th, 71st, Claire, Mize, you're closer to 500 to about 3,000 cars per day. So the traffic counts are so much lower. The use for the same street section is just not, it's not practical to build the same street section when the traffic count isn't the same, and then even the adjacent uses and land uses aren't the same. And then our proposed street sections, we would have a green industrial like 43rd Street, green arterials, and green collectors, and it would just be a new way of basically classifying them, so when developers came in, we could give them very defined direction on what type of street improvements they would be required to make adjacent to their property. And the biggest one is, and this is what the governing body liked, of course, this is the cost analysis. And so Lauren Snyder, our city engineer, did a detailed cost analysis. You're going to see where there's many assumptions made. This is more along the lines of, because it's hard to figure out, well, what size of storm pipe are you going to use and how much cut and fill and how much rock are you going to hit. But they based it on a standard road that the city builds. And to do a mile of our current street section, so picture Woodland, a 3-lane with bike lanes with sidewalks, is about $5.5 million per mile of road. With the Green Street section, it's about $3.4 million. And that $2.1 million savings, that comes in because storm systems are really expensive. Enclosed systems, inlets, pipes, they usually could be anywhere from a third to half of a street project, depending on the size of the storm system. We also save a lot of money because of curb and gutter. That's expensive. And then you're also saving because we're basically doing a street diet and eliminating that center turn lane. Maintenance over the cost of 10 years, we would save about $20,000 in 10 years. So from 45,000 miles to $45,000 per mile, it'd be about $25,000 per mile for a cost savings of $20,000. And that includes less crack sealing, less mill and overlay, and less snow plowing. So all those costs are factored into there. So our fourth action as a committee was kind of implement this. And this year, you guys are all familiar with Heartland Logistics Center at 43rd Street in Clare Road off of K7. So this is a challenging project because it's in the floodplain. It's a very flat area. And a traditional enclosed storm system doesn't work. There's no way to put it in and have it have a slope and actually have ability to daylight. The Kansas River is the closest body of water it could daylight to, and there's no way to actually have it gravity flow to there. So other options looked at pumping the storm water to the river, which is not cost effective at all. And so we examined other projects, and this is where the idea came in, is leave it as a ditch section, street section, a ditch section street. This would drain to infiltration basins on private property, and then 100% of the storm water generated from the street and the future site improvements would be infiltrated into the ground. And it's a sandy soil, so it allows for that infiltration practice. So this is one way that this is an industrial green street being implemented currently in Shawnee. The next one, if you guys are familiar with, obviously, Beavers Farms out in western Shawnee, is adjacent to Greens of Chapel Creek, 8th Plat. This was a local developer that came in. The parents have passed. It's a homestead piece of property. They wanted to save that 5.5 acre agricultural section with their farm buildings and their farm implement buildings and the pond, but they wanted to develop some lots out there. And 67th Street stops at Greens of Chapel Creek. So the photo on the bottom right, you can see those are the current street improvements that dead end, and it's about a 40-foot stretch of pavement section. To be able to develop this property, they would have to continue that street section all the way to Clare Road. To do that is not cost-effective at all, and it also exceeds the need of what 67th really needs to be based on traffic counts. So we talked to the developer, and we reached an agreement where they would continue the street improvements, but at a green street section. So they're going to continue from there, and it's kind of hard to see, but they'll transition from the curb and gutter 40-foot wide pavement section down to a 26-foot pavement section, the stitch section, all the way to Clare. And this is a huge connection the city needs because it provides access from Shawnee Mission Parkway, which transitions into 67th Street to Clare. And it gives the people on Western Shawnee the ability to get on K7 or take the Parkway in, east to get to work. And you'll see here's just some more photos. You can see, it's a very where the road ends right now, and to get a road through there, it just is so cost prohibitive. But it allows them to develop their property, but it also gives the city the advantage that we get that much needed connection. We've talked a lot, and we like to look this as not lessening our street standards or lowering our street standards, but being innovative and finding sustainable streets that are low to maintain, that provide economic opportunities, but are also built to provide livability for our residents, but also a manageable maintenance cost for us long-term at the city of Shawnee.
Awesome. Thank you, Reagan. What a great job. So we, as I stated, we gave this presentation to the governing body via council committee earlier in, I guess it's April now. So we wanted to just bring it back to the Planning Commission to kind of get a blessing before staff spent any additional time engineering these green street sections or moving forward with updating the comprehensive plan. As I said, the comprehensive plan is going to get a general update later this year and definitely next year as well, but staff does everything that they can kind of in-house to update those sections as well. So the end goal of the concept is to really develop a customizable approach to promote development in those more rural parts of our community while still providing a safe and sustainable street section. That's why during this whole process we really wanted to keep our community and our residents in mind. What do we hear the most about here, at City Hall? What do our residents want the most when we're talking about upgrading our street sections? And that's they want them to be safe. They want which includes the addition of streetlights, and they also want it to be walkable. We have a really healthy and walk-friendly community, and so we want to continue that. Just because you live off of Mize or off of Clare doesn't mean that you can't have those amenities that are in the more or less rural areas of our community. So with that, concludes our presentation, and Reagan and I are here if you have any questions. I do believe all of you are muted, so if you would like to speak, all you would need to do is unmute.
Thanks, Carolyn and Reagan. This is Commissioner Beanoff. I do have a quick question. For future street improvements, if the streets needed to be improved even further, who would be responsible for that and how would it be paid for?
It would be the responsibility of the city via our capital improvement plan, just like any improvements to Monticello Road is a really good example. The city has that on their capital improvement plan for, I believe, 2023. So any improvements further than what the developer would do here would be a city responsibility. A number of those funding come through items. The city is really, really good at getting outside funding, whether that be from the federal level or from the state or county level. So hopefully we would supplement some of that funding, but you're correct. Usually the capital improvement plan is funded through our tax base.
Great, thank you. What questions does the commission have for staff on this?
Commissioner Peterson has her hand raised.
Shocking, I know. One of the questions that was partially answered by Commissioner Beanoff's question, but first of all, I really, really like this. I think it will be viable. It'll be a piece that we can offer residents as well as developers, because strangely enough, lots of people I've talked to that live out in Western Shawnee obviously want street improvements, but yet they don't want to lose their feel. And quite frankly, some of them don't even want gutters. So this, I think, is a plan that I don't see it as offering less. I see it as adapting. And I thought it was very responsibly done. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Leo Nunick.
Go ahead.
So, as these streets develop, and if on the sections where there's not a development, you mentioned that the HOAs would be responsible for the maintenance, the upkeep of the green space. If there's, these are long stretches of road, there may be a development, and there may be a section of road there is no development. Who is responsible for that? Because I've driven, whether it's Southern Overland Park or wherever, and you drive along and there's a green space like that that's really nicely maintained, and then boom, you hit this other one that's a bunch of 2 feet tall grass and trash and everything like that. So who is it? The city then takes over that responsibility or what?
Yep, so it depends on how that parcel, I guess, that's undeveloped is zoned. Generally, in the areas that we're talking about, they're going to be zoned agricultural. And so I don't want to say maintenance requirements, but mowing upon the right-of-way or right-of-way maintenance of those areas are a little less stringent than they would be on a residential type development. So that's probably exactly what you're referring to when you're driving along. There's a residential development, it's all nice and manicured, and then all of a sudden come up on a seemingly vacant piece of land, usually very large, that in the future could probably be a residential development, but just isn't yet.
Right.
Probably zoned agricultural, and we definitely can look at our maintenance requirements on those, but right now, you're right, they do have a little bit less stringent maintenance requirements. There is partial mowing. Obviously, they need to keep them clean, no illegal dumping, no trash, any of that. But the mowing requirements are much lax than a proper residential development.
Thank you, Caitlin. Any other questions?
Yes, Commissioner Braley, I've got a few.
Go ahead.
So making sure I understand, with regards to working with developers, as you had stated previously, when developers were coming in and building out residential developments, that they were required to build basically half a street, putting in the curb and gutter sidewalk, and then the other half of the street was left as is. Moving forward with green streets, what is the requirement for the developer? Then are they then responsible for the entire length of the street, both sides, or is it still going to be limited to the one side adjacent to their property as far as the roadway that they need to improve? That's my first question. I'll stop there and then we can go on.
Okay, Reagan, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So currently, they kind of almost build a green street, so at Preserve of Clear Creek, that very first slide we kind of pulled up that showed that road close sign, that's Clear Road. So on the west side, west side of the road, where it's adjacent to Preserve of Clear Creek, they did street lights and enclosed storm system. The east side, they had to grade out the ditch because they still have to provide proper drainage on the east side. They can't just basically provide a drainage maintenance issue or negative impacts to the people on the east side. So they're technically almost building the green street on the east side already because they still have to provide that drainage, and then they typically will put like an area inlet on that side to collect the water in the ditch and then drain it across the street to the enclosed system on the west side. So they would do basically full improvements of the green street for the length of their property.
Okay. Next question is, you were given, and just so you know, Reagan, I live at 75th and Gleason, so I drive and ride my bike very much on the west side of K7, so I very much know what we're dealing with.
I live out there too, so I got that.
So you mentioned the traffic counts. When were those traffic counts completed?
So our transportation manager did them this year. I don't know exactly the method, and we can get back to you on how he did it, but those were recently completed by him.
Okay, so that's most of the west side of K7, because one of the areas I've brought up to Kevin in the past, and it had to do with the park, was basically Gleason and 71st Street, and just kind of in that area, and 75th all the way up to Mize, with all the school traffic and kids getting to DeSoto, There are certainly, I just want to make sure those are current because I've requested it in the past to know that specifically related to Gleason and the one-lane bridge we have there. But okay, so that answers that question.
We
So then-
get you a exact date from Kevin, I'm sure. That's not an
Okay.
issue.
That's fine. This one's just more of kind of a curious. I too am in favor of this. I think these are great solutions and certainly have lots of benefits environmentally and the economics to it. It's great hearing all the positives, but I'm also always kind of concerned about our blind spot, things that we don't know when we implement this and how does it impact the future. Now, I hear that we're going to buy plenty of right-of-way, so if capacity surprises us, we'll have the ability to do that. Storm runoff and kind of the drainage ditch sections and how that's maintained in erosion. So if we take, for example, what you were talking about, the industrial area down by the river, and we're going to be using this model for streets and saying that the soils can accommodate the runoff, does that hold true if we fully build out all the industrial and we have all of this asphalt surface and all of this roof surface for the materials? Can that new type of drainage sort of move that water where it needs to go and avoid any flooding down in that area?
So in the case of like Heartland Logistics, which are you familiar with Westland Business Park out there off of 43rd Street on the east side?
Yeah.
It's already implemented the infiltration practice. That's really site specific to Westland and then also Heartland because you have to have a sandy soil to accommodate it. But the drainage studies that they did, they've sized those infiltration basins to accommodate a 500-year event, so they can infiltrate up to a 500-year event in those infiltration basins. And they'll be located around the building, so it covers all the buildings with Heartland, all the parking lots, and 43rd Street. So 100% of the stormwater from 43rd and all private improvements associated with Project Homeland, Heartland Logistics, it will be infiltrated. In your other streets, like Mize and Clare, you're going to be more into clay soils and rocky soils again. So it's going to be where our enclosed systems, they go to a certain point and then they have to daylight into a creek. So the ditches will be similar, where there'll be breaks in the ditch to either get to, and our recent project, Legacy Crossing, that's out there at 79th, 75th, and Clare, same thing, they're providing some ditch breaks to allow water to alleviate and go to a natural stream that's out there and go to a farm pond that's existing. But the developers will have to get offsite easements to make sure that we're grading the ditches to not have any negative impacts downstream, and also make sure the water's redirected to a natural body of water. So either some type of existing stream out there or pond, and not change the watershed or the current drainage patterns substantially.
Okay. And then my final question is, you showed us what you as a department have sort of recommended as what our Green Street standard is with paved shoulders, a path. So is that, there's no compromise, as I'm understanding that when we're talking about this and want to incorporate this, that is what we are going to build. And what I'm going to ask here specifically, let's say if we apply it to Gleason, between 71st and go up to 79th, then is the city coming in and purchasing additional right-of-way to build it out so we do have the paved shoulders, so that we do have a path? How will that be applied to not just something where there's no development, if taking Clare, but there is already development and there's already a ditch and there's already homes built? How are we going to sort of come in and get the additional right-of-way to build that Green Street in existing conditions?
So
I think that be added to our capital improvement plan in the future. So as we were just discussing, some of those streets that may be a bit more developed than like a goat path of Clare, that still need to be improved, would be added to a capital improvement plan for the city and improved to the nature of a rural street standard or green street standard that is recommended by the classification that we've just talked about. So whether that be Gleason or whether that be 71st Street or whatever that looks like, the streets that have already been developed on would be added and paid for by the city rather than a developer.
But I guess what I'm asking is, would it be just simply overlaid with new asphalt, or are we saying that in certain cases, no, we're going to build improved infrastructure for those, and those will be Green Street profile sections with the shoulders, with the sidewalk?
If it was a city capital improvement project, we come in and we would basically look at the alignment, because Gleason, there's that jog in there. It's not, if you look at the circulation plan, I believe Gleason actually goes straight through and doesn't jog at 71st, and it shows it going through a residential home out there. But if it's a CIP project, yes, we would look at the alignment of it, the horizontal alignment, the site distance, and those horizontal and vertical aspects of the street would be corrected through a CIP. We'd get the amount of right-of-way we need, all the ditches. It would be built to a very set Green Street standard. The problem we have is with the CIP, we have limited funds for that, and it's priority, and then it's also funding that we get available from, the county and the state. This is hoping to implement this first with development projects and hoping to spur development and helps generate more tax revenue and get more connectivity out there. So we're hoping that with the Green Streets, this basically helps the economic development out in Western Shawnee and starts making some of those connections we desperately need out there, like Clare Road going through. And then hope to then start applying it to the CIP plan as we can. Because we kind of think that as we do the Green Streets and find that they work and people like them, it actually helps get more CIP projects to happen sooner, because what we have budgeted for Miser Clare might be 20 years out and it's a higher amount, but now it's going to be $2 million less based on the Green Street section. So we're hoping this revamps the CIP plan as well. But it's just, the first part of this is really adopting it in the comp plan and applying it towards developments, and then hoping that translates into benefits on the CIP side.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Braley. Any other questions out there from the commission? Mr. Nunnick?
Yes, so I don't know if there's been any projected 20-year development traffic studies done, but just in looking forward, and you said obviously we'd be getting enough right away that if it ever needed to be developed into a 3-lane or 2-lane with a turn lane, curb and guttered or whatever, that there's the room to do that. My biggest concern is that so many times when you do projects and you do it and this looks good, I totally understand the rationale behind it, but I harken back to the thoughts about our issues with our culverts that we've had to replace in the city because they were not really done the right way 20 years ago. Whenever they were done, we've had to replace them, and I just always get concerned when we say, well, we can do things cheaper, we can do things less expensive, and then 15, 20 years down the road we go, we really should have just done it the right way to begin with. And I'm not saying this is the wrong way. I know I'm familiar with the areas you're talking about in Southern Overland Park that do it, and if they're maintained right, they look great. But has there been any projections on when you think we would have to be doing those improvements?
We've had a lot of discussions about that. And we, on the staff side, are dealing with the repercussions of, excuse my language, half-assed decisions 20, 30 years ago. We're dealing with those repercussions now. And I would bet that every staff member on this call agrees with me when I say we're not here to do it improperly, and we're ready to make improvements for areas that may not necessarily see them in the next 10, 20, 30 years without implementation like this. I think our strategic plan, and I know you all are aware that we're going through that process right now, I think it's really revitalized our development and our planning staff as far as what do we want Shawnee to look like in 10, 20, 30 years, and how can we make that happen sooner rather than later. Because if we're going to require Clare to be built as the comprehensive plan states now for like a Woodland or like a Quivira, I don't know, and I'm sure Reagan also doesn't know, a number of developers that are willing to do that. And so in order to help supplement that development and hopefully spur that development a little bit faster to get that revenue increased in those more rural areas of our community, I think that this is absolutely the perfect solution for us, especially as, and I can't remember who stated it earlier, but those individuals that may live out west who like I used this word earlier, rurality, the ruralness of where they live, that may not want those curb and sidewalk, or those curb and gutters and stormwater systems. They like the ditches, but what do they also want? They want sidewalks. And how can we give them the amenities that they want while also providing for not only the staff now, but thinking about the staff? It's going to be great when I still work here in 30 years and I'm going to have to deal with the repercussions of the decisions that we still make today. So I completely understand what you're talking about, because we are dealing with the outcomes of those decisions now. And I think we have a different mindset and mentality today than was 15, 20, 30 years ago.
Can I add too, like with the proposals too, there won't be any inferior products. There will not be metal pipe. And a lot of the battles we have right now is metal pipe. Everything will still be concrete pipe. So we're not lessening or using inferior products to build the roads. It's really cost savings based on a street diet. So the asphalt pipes will be the exact same as we do for all other streets in Shawnee. Our sub-base requirements, whether it's a treated sub-base or AB3, they'll be the same things. That sub-base is what you need to get that asphalt to hold up. If we got a steeper street section, there might be where they have to enclose it so we don't have erosion in the ditches, or they might have to do some ditch checks. So there'll be engineering principles and practices in place. And again, we aren't going to go inferior on the type. The asphalt you see on Mize and Clear will be the same asphalt that you get on Monticello. It'll be the same concrete pipe. Nothing like that will be lessened. It's really a cost savings through a street diet, and saving on the curb and gutter, which again adds a lot on the mill and overlay, and isn't necessarily needed in more of a rural environment, and also a cost savings on the enclosed storm system. It really increases the cost of a project to do an enclosed storm system. When we have a lot of natural creeks and beautiful streamways out there, and I think the benefit of using those to get the stormwater naturally there is just beneficial to the residents out there, but also to the developers that want to develop here. If you look at Overland Park, they've already done CIP projects down there on their section lines, so they've already condemned property and they've got their section line roads in. Shawnee has not done that, so we're asking the developers to build backbone roads that we've never built. And it really makes it hard as a developer to build small sections that we see. We don't get large developments, we get smaller, 40 acres here, 60 acres there. And in Overland Park, they've got that infrastructure in on the sections already, so developers don't have to do that. And it's hard to put in a major street like that and work on detours and upsetting residents when their streets are closed for, weeks and months. So it really is trying to find a balance of wanting development and still making sure that we have a quality street for the long term.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Any other commissioners have any questions for staff?
I have a question. First of all, I just want to say, in general, I'm very favorable to this green street concept and being practical, not overbuilding, and also the environmental piece of it. And along those lines, I'm just wondering that the idea of the manicured, as you called it, ditches, is there any model or example of a more natural scape that would be, again, environmentally sensitive and also speak to that issue or concern that I think Commissioner Nunnick raised earlier about the inconsistency of different HOAs doing the maintenance?
Yeah. I think there's opportunity to make them more green with some more native materials. We find we use a lot of salt to treat the roads when there's, and so salt does not do well. A lot of vegetation doesn't hold up, and we found that in our parking lots when we've implemented bioretention cells and rain gardens. It's also very costly, and it can be a lot of maintenance long term. So I think there's definite benefits, and there's things to look at for that, for sure. But I think we're finding that even small little, 20 by 20 foot rain gardens aren't real cost effective for small sites to maintain. So asking HOAs to basically, they absorb the cost of bioretention type cells is going to be hard. I think it's definitely worth looking into more, but I think the turf grass has a provided benefit and adds to the benefit, but still is maintainable for HOAs long term and is easier for maintenance.
Thank you for that question, Mr. Montgomery. Any other questions?
I do, now that you brought that up about with the HOAs maintaining the perimeter on that, I live in Crystal Place. And what's interesting in the way, and we found this out by surprise because our house backs up to 75th Street. And so when we moved in 10 years ago, we assumed, as we'd seen elsewhere, that stretch of grass and sidewalk between 75th Street and the back of our properties was maintained by our HOA. And then over time, one summer, like, that grass is getting awfully long. When are they going to come around and maintain and mow that? And we found out later, shame on us, we should have read the fine print in the HOA covenants, but no, that was our individual responsibility to mow that back there. And so we do have a very non-uniform look to our residential development that backs up to 75th Street. Do we have any way of controlling that kind of language within an HOA covenant so that anything that's sort of backing up to a public street, that it is maintained by the HOA and they do not have the ability to turn it over to the individual property owners?
Yes. So what we'll do is, if you look at some of the newer subdivisions, so some of the older subdivisions that was the lot lines basically extend to the street, you don't have landscape tracks. What we do currently in the more newer subdivisions is we have landscape tracks, and it's for this very reason, so that it's, the HOA has to maintain it and lot owners don't get stuck trying to maintain something that's not reasonable or it's outside the fence for the subdivision. So if you're familiar with like Gray Oaks in Western Shawnee at Johnson Drive and Monticello, in some of those areas, those are all landscape tracks. Greens of Chapel Creek has landscape tracks, and they're HOA maintained. So this would be a similar concept that the right-of-way or the landscape tracks would basically be dedicated as HOA's responsibility to maintain, and the lot lines would not extend into the ditch sections. Does that make sense, kind of?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Reagan, and thank you, Commissioner Brayley, for the question. If any other commissioners have questions, please announce yourself. Any other commissioners have questions or comments? Hearing none, well, I think that was a very, very nice presentation. I think it certainly makes sense from my personal perspective to move down in that direction. And I would ask Mark, are we looking for a motion or anything on this item?
This is Doug. No, this was an informational type thing, just to make sure that you guys understood the concept and that you were comfortable with the overall concept. Obviously, we're talking about comprehensive plan changes. You guys will have your eyes on this again, probably more than once. But the thing is that a comp plan update takes time, and we're wanting to implement these kind of on a case-by-case basis as development occurs. It sounds like there's consensus among your group, the preliminary plats that may need to consider these types of street sections make sense, and we have buy-in by the governing body, who obviously pays to maintain the asphalt type and surfaces over the time of the life of the street. And so I think we're comfortable now just in the discussion, but as we go forward with the official adoption or approval of comprehensive plans, this won't be unfamiliar to you. So nothing formal in terms of a vote or anything like that. I think this was really for informational purposes.
Okay, very good, Doug. Thank you very much. If there is no more discussion on the Green Streets presentation, then I would ask if there is any other business. Does the staff have any other business for the commission?
I just have one short thing. I know that you guys have been online for a long time, but I want to just read you a quick, kind of a feel-good thing during this weirdest of times. I actually got an email this morning from our chief building official, Tyler Worth, who has been really the front line of the city's development face and trying to keep that development construction train on the tracks. And so I just want to read this. It'll take about 30 seconds. It has some interesting numbers and some interesting perspectives. So he said, Doug, just some interesting numbers on building permits for the last month from 3/16 of 2020 to 4/17 of 2020. These dates are the dates since Chris and Ethan, those are our plans examiners, have been working from home, and Jim Lorenz, has been the only inspector in the field. I send you these numbers to thank you and upper management for allowing us to continue to work in a safe manner to provide this service for our community, and to thank Chris, Ethan, and Jim for all their hard work in these different times. Thank you again. So for that 1 month period, that group issued 115 building permits in a city hall that's closed. They issued 14 new single-family residential permits to families still wanting to keep their dream alive. They issued 10 new commercial remodel permits. Jim alone, in that 1 month period, completed 425 field inspections. And this is interesting too, that our permit plan review fees collected, and that's just building permit fees, that's not counting infrastructure improvement fees and things like that Reagan would be dealing with, total just in that month, $190,177. And so that revenue stream keeps first responders, police, fire, those are general fund dollars that keep the city functioning. And so I just wanted to pass that along and really give that group, and actually our entire department, Mark, Zilsdorf, Reagan, the whole team, a lot of kudos for keeping this process alive, I guess, if you will. And that piggybacks with you guys being willing to participate in these type of calls and keep plans and projects and zonings and things like that going forward when we're all supposed to be 6 to 10 feet apart and in groups of no larger than 10 people. So I wanted to pass that along. Another happy note, I let Caitlin know this earlier today, but Pathlight Brewery down at 75th and Neiman, they called for their final acceptance today, so maybe when this is all past us and we can all see each other face to face, we can go celebrate down there, celebrate their opening with a beverage. And if you guys remember that required an ordinance change that you guys were instrumental in getting through the process for them to ever be able to take that risk and start that process in the first place. So kind of not a pet speech, but I think it's important that we all kind of keep a perspective during this weirdest of times. And with that, that's all I've got, you guys.
Great, thanks, Doug. That's very good news, and appreciate everyone's continued hard work and diligence to keep growth going on in our city. With that, any other business from the commission for the staff?
Mr. Chairman, real quick, I just want to thank the staff for getting us up and running on Zoom. This meeting went a lot smoother having the technology to do it this way. Thank you.
Commissioner Montgomery, I agree. I think it worked very well. I would say it's probably smoother than the teleconference we had a couple of times. So appreciate that. If there's nothing else, then would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Mr. Chairman, I would move we adjourn.
Thank you, Commissioner Montgomery. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Bingham. There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that item? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next time. And hopefully have Commissioner Busby back with us again.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Much appreciated.
Thank you all. Good night. Bye, Mark. Bye, Doug. Nailed it. Good job.
Hi, Caitlin.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Thanks for helping us put this together.
You're welcome. Hanging up.
Goodbye.